Mette, it's also a pleasure to welcome you here. Mette, together with Peter Senke, has done a lot in order to increase the awareness that a system change is necessary. She is working at the MIT and also a member of our advisory board, Empathy Makes School, and the Danish Association. Your ability to reach a lot of people is something that we need, and I'm looking forward to hear some content from your work. Thank you very much.
My phone, because it has a clock on it, and I can talk for hours about this because I'm really enthusiastic about the work that we're doing and how I'm able to be in this space here today. So I don't even want to apologize that I'm not speaking in German because it would be so dreadfully boring to all of you if I tried. I haven't been speaking kein Deutsch für 30 Jahre, so I'm not going to try. I hope that this will work out. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. I will understand questions also in German, and I have German ancestry, so I feel pretty good about standing here today. So it's a special treat, really, to be part of or have some kind of role in this particular work that is led by Helle. And as Helle shared, I'm the executive director of a center, what we call a non-for-profit, called the Center for Systems Awareness. It's based out of the US, but we work globally with systems change in education, but what we call it compassionate systems change. And then recently we had the opportunity to also, I've been a research scientist at MIT for a couple of years, but now we also have a lab at MIT where we're studying the impact of this work. And as those of you, at least who come out of the academic traditions, you can all imagine having MIT in the same sentence as the term compassion actually helps quite a bit. So we get to talk to people in a somewhat different way about the necessity of cultivating skill sets of caring, of being friendly amongst each other, of wanting to participate in a good way in social relations and so on. So many of the things that Helle's work is really identifying and cultivating with teachers and students both. I have the great opportunity to work around the world, and I just want to give you kind of an overview of what that looks like. So we have this might not be logical to you at all, but I didn't know how to illustrate it. So in some places we work primarily with schools and school sites. Those are the red dots. And then I see it's not entirely updated, but the ones with the ripple effects are where we've had the opportunity to work district-wide or statewide or countrywide. So for example, in Southeast Asia, we have a kind of a collaboration between Dulwich colleges that are founded in Singapore, but has a cluster of schools throughout Southeast Asia in collaboration with the Woodley Schools of Australia, which is about 32 schools, and the Catalyst Project in Hong Kong, which has 7 schools, and so on and so forth, and that's a kind of a collaboration there. I do want to focus, however, on the work in California, which is my primary focus as of now, for this time being, because this is where we have the opportunity to really study the impact of the work. And we have the great opportunity to work with the State Department of Education in California, several counties, which is like the regions, and districts, and students, and other entities around that. And so the systems part becomes actual and real in a process like this. Same is the case in British Columbia and Canada. We work province-wide in British Columbia, which means we work with the Ministry of Education, but also the Ministry of Health and Wellbeing. We work with UBC, the University of British Columbia. We work with the superintendents. We work with the principals. We work with the students. We work with the teachers, and so on. And this is important. And I'm sure all those of you who are in schools will know exactly why this is important, right? Because we see so many great initiatives that are somehow implemented into schools. And then there's no buy-in from the people above in the system, or there's buy-in from the superintendent or whatever that person is called in this system here. And then that person leaves, and no more focus on this particular project because that lived with that one person who now made the decisions. And for a project like Hilles, which is not a programmatic intervention, I want to walk you through a model of just showing how much deeper something like this can go, because we're wanting to get out of the predicament that this kind of work lives with individuals in the systems, and to something that's actually a kind of a collective orientation to how we do school, how we educate, what's the purpose of education. So since I have limited time, and I can go on forever. I'm going to check my phone regularly. And I also want to just highlight, and this is the spoiler alert, highlight two things that I would like you to take away from this particular little talk. So one is, which is, part of why I'm standing here today. One is that really well-educated people over the last couple of hundred of years, really well-educated people, mainly men, not saying anything, just pointing out facts, have made the decisions that led to where we are today. Climate change, extinction rates, lack of health and well-being all over the world, rapidly declining, suicide rates growing, and so on and so forth. That's the reality that we live in. And most of the decisions that led us to this place were made by people who were really influential and had really good educational backgrounds. So clearly, something needs to change in education. That's the one kind of point. And secondly, and that's what I'm going to try to illustrate with this little model here, what we call the systems awareness iceberg. Basically, what I want to highlight is this understanding that structure shapes behavior. And I'll walk you through this in a moment so you don't have to kind of try to figure it all out now. But the point is, I hear over and over again everywhere in the world, the system is broken. And no, it's not. The system is producing exactly the outcomes it was designed to produce. So if these are the outcomes of kids being miserable, of teachers being miserable, of lack of respect and understanding, and of no real care infused in the system, then the very structure that we designed this system around needs to change. And that's why it won't do that we have yet another programmatic intervention. As Helle was saying, it's not about an off-the-shelf program that can now come and fix things. So I'm going to walk you through this model here because I hope that might somehow resonate a little bit and bring about this, what we call the systems awareness perspective, which to me, and I'm super biased, so you'll have to, I have to apologize in advance, but to me is essential and what is lacking in most places in education around the world, that we truly understand that structure shapes behavior. We need to change the structure in order to produce different outcomes. So at the surface, above the surface, we all know we see approximately between 7 and 12% of the iceberg, right? And that's what we call the events. And events are the stuff that kind of overwhelms us or hijacks us emotionally. And with good reason often. Think about that day in February when Russia invaded Ukraine. Of course it overwhelms us. Of course we're kind of caught by that. The situation in Europe all of a sudden destabilizing to a degree we haven't seen in many, many years, and it's frightful and all of that. Or at the everyday level, think about how many little messages we get in every day. All the little pings and bings. You've noticed the sensory overwhelm that we're all in constantly, because it's oh so important that we pick up on everything that's going on. The thing is, our brains have not evolved to the... I should probably say that I'm a biologist, and I will talk about brains a little bit also. So I think we forgot to... you said my name, so I don't have to care about that. Great. I'm a biologist, by the way, and so I studied the evolution of complex social systems, and I'm really interested in seeing, not just at the brain level, but also at the kind of embodied level, how, when we come together, what actually happens, and how we can improve that, what we call the social field, which is why my affinity for Helle's work goes very deep. So at the event level, our brains have not evolved to deal with the level of information, the sensory input that we're confronted with every day. It's just not, brain has not caught up to social media. And the average American teenager gets between 400 and 700 different messages a day. I can't even handle 3 text messages. I'm like, oh no. So I don't quite know how people do it. But what we do know is that it puts us in a kind of a heightened state of alert. What we call the amygdala response system is constantly activated. And that creates a new baseline, but it creates a new baseline where the buffer or the resilience is just diminishing over time because we're constantly in that space. The only way we know of how to kind of counterbalance that from a scientific perspective is through rigorous and continuous mindfulness practices. It's the only way we've learned so far. So when we talk about contemplative practices, learning how to breathe, what we just did with Peter, with the kind of, engaging in a different way, but kind of keeping a bodily focus, why we talk about compassion and cultivating this spirit of kindness and sensitivity to what's going on around us, is essential to counterbalance that. Chances are slim that social media is going to go anywhere anytime soon. So either we stay with this predicament where there's a constancy of overload and heightened anxiety that comes with that, sense of disconnect, being overwhelmed by things, or we find the ways in which we might, in a meaningful way, coexist with the way of the world. And the only way we know how to do that is actually through these types of practices. It doesn't have to be called one thing or the other. I work in many different contexts. I've worked in the country of Jordan, for example, with very conservative imams and Bedouin tribes. And we talk about the presence of the heart, which is essential to their whole their whole understanding and the way in which they operate in life. So it's not different. It exists within our cultures already. We know that being able to focus, being able to take a deep breath when we need to is actually really important. So at this event level, what we see is, this, what we can call the emotional hijacking. And usually it creates kind of a reactive response, right? And I'm particularly aware, of course, that happens every day, all the time in schools. Kids acting out, kids getting into a fight, something happening in the classroom, and there's an immediacy of having to fix that, having to do something about it. What usually happens, however, is what we forget to see just below the surface is the patterns over time, or what we can call the behavioral dynamics that leads to these events to erupt. So, sometimes we do take, to step back and try to look at what happened before, this little kid hit that other kid, and we knew that they had, some level of conflict and so on, so that we try to kind of focus on, well, something was going on before that. It didn't just occur in a vacuum. There is something that happened before, and then some kind of eruption, and now it's going to happen again. Now, what we usually see is that most kind of interventions at the school level or in education in general are interventions at this level. So we have lack of well-being, for example, so we invent some kind of well-being program that we try to insert into the system as it is already. Keep in mind, a structure that was never ever created to embrace anything like a well-being program. And now we try to kind of stack it on top and we say, oh, the system is broken, let's fix it. And that's not the case. We are literally trying to insert something that hasn't been designed for, that is not living within the structure, and so it can only live with individuals. And as Helle mentioned, as soon as these individuals leaves, the whole effort dissipates. And over time, how many of you are educators in here who work directly in schools? Have you ever had the feeling that yet another program, and now we're going to do this, and it's probably not going to go anywhere anyway? Have anybody ever tried that? Yet another program. This probably not going to go anywhere. Oh, this principal wants this, or this superintendent wants this, and we've tried it before. Kind of a sense of resignation. Is that familiar territory? Because it is to educators everywhere else in the world I work. For good reasons, right? We're now trying to insert some kind of new, programmatic intervention so that we can fix these events up here, but what we're really not focusing on is the structure in place. And keep in mind, structure shapes behavior. So if we're not working to change the structure around so that when we do our work with social emotional learning or contemplative practices or empathy macht Schule, we can't actually make sure that this will be successful in any way, because it will not live in the very structure of education. That's why the systems part of this work is really essential. Now, for most people, and I don't know if that's like this for you all, but for most people, when we say stuff like underlying structure, people's eyes glaze over a little bit, and we're like, yeah, well, I don't really know what that means anyway, and it's something out there. It's okay if you're feeling that way, because part of what goes into what we call the underlying structure is this thing, the artifacts. So it's the infrastructure. It's the how we organize. Who's in the meetings, who gets invited, who creates the agenda, who sits where. All the kind of tangible aspects of how we're thinking about things lies in the artifacts. It's the metrics. What do we measure? The sad truth is we usually measure what we know how to measure, and then we say that those are the important things, right? Nobody's ever come up with a good sense of measure for a sense of belonging or love or feeling cared for, which we all know is probably, basic human foundational needs and actually increases academic performance way, way more than any programmatic interventions designed to increase academic performance has ever done. But we just don't know how to measure that well. That's what we're trying to, I won't say fix, but at least we're looking at that at MIT at our new lab, and in collaboration, of course, with a lot of other people around the world who see things the same way. It's also the policy. How many of you have been actively taking part in creating policy around education? A couple of people. Policy and curriculum. How many have been actively developing new curriculum in here? Few people. So policy, curriculum, metrics, all of those things are the kind of the tangible, the manifestations, if you will. But what is really essential is what we talk about as the mental models. So whereas the artifacts are the ways in which we can see the mental models are our habitual ways of thinking, of feeling, and of acting. And that is usually never addressed. So when we see new curriculum developed, and it's a great curriculum, and that could really change things around, when we're not working with the mental models, when same old teachers show up in the same old way in the same old classrooms and teach exactly the same shit that they've been teaching always, it ain't gonna happen, right? It's not working that we're changing the curriculum unless we really focus on changing the mental models. Now, the essence of this work, Empathy macht Schule, is working at this level. That's why it's much more long-term, because this is hard work, right? It's not as if we can do it out there. We have to do it in here. But as we could hear, it's also very gratifying, because all of a sudden we actually get to show up as real humans doing the real work. These are our kids. It's the future of society. Of course they should be met with real humans doing the real work and knowing how to care and knowing how to show that care in a meaningful way. So this whole level here, our habitual way of thinking and feeling and acting, is basically, the lenses through which we're able to see the world. And anybody who tells you that, oh, I fixed it, I've seen all my mental models now, that's not true. They're trying to trick you in some way, because it's hard. It is literally the water we swim in, right? The best way in which we can come to some kind of meaningful perception of our own mental model is by being confronted with someone who has significantly different mental models. Now back to social media and all the echo chambers we're all in now. Less and less of that is available in the world, as compared to at least when I was a kid and when most of us were younger, right? Because now the algorithms will keep feeding us all the same stuff that they think we want to hear. And of course we click on it all, right? You won't believe he did that. Oh, my brain is already there. And now I'm clicking on all these things. I don't know about you all, but mine is like videos of dogs, get a lot of those in my news feed. And so that means that most of the other people that I will ever see or hear or interact with through the social media platform will be the other people who also like videos of dogs. Might be some of you in here. But the thing is, that means that I can't now be confronted with my mental models or understanding how I'm showing up in the world. It just becomes, that's just the way it is. And that's why we see the polarization we do in politics all over the world right now, which is a dangerous place for us to be, particularly in this time when we know that the mental health and well-being of our young people everywhere in the world is declining rapidly. Suicide rates are growing so intensely that I don't stand here just as a scientist and just as somebody who really loves doing this work, but I'm also a mother and I'm a grandmother, and I truly, deeply am concerned about the trajectory that our children are, that they're on. The path to the future does not look at all like what I would wish for my children and my grandchildren and all the other kids in this world. Because somehow, it seems to me at least, they're all our kids. We all need to care about them. And in a meaningful way for us to do that, we have to create those spaces around them where the adults that surrounds the kids can show up in a little different way and really embrace this, humanness and growth and developing and flourishing of humanness. But that's not enough if we only work with the teachers and the principals. What about the district leaders? And what about the policymakers? If they don't understand this work, it's not probably going to live, and it's not going to create this whole, change of structure so that we see significantly different events in future. Hopefully, my hope would be we could come back together here in 10 years or 15 years, and we can say, yeah, we actually did it. We managed to change the structure around into something that is a flourishing pathway for humankind and all the other species on our planet. So what I would like you to do now, and it's only an invitation, but you all have a little piece of paper and a pen, I think. So my suggestion is that you draw down an iceberg. It's always easier if you actually draw it, and think about it in a meaningful context for yourself. Think about an event that makes sense to you, something that has some level of kind of emotional resonance. And I don't mean think about COVID, because that'll become one big abstraction. But if you're thinking about something in COVID, think about the day I discovered I had COVID, or someone I knew died, or something like that. So it's a particular event, so it becomes more meaningful. And then I would just invite you to go down the iceberg and try to, look at what might be the patterns over time that led to this particular event, or the behavioral dynamics of the system, if you will. And what are some of the elements of mental models and artifacts that I could begin to look at in this. And this is not a test. You should say that in a room full of educators, right? This is not a test. There's no trick in it at all, but it's just a way for you, an invitation for you all to begin to reflect on this particular way, which is the entry model we use for beginning to teach systems awareness. And then take a couple of minutes doing that. And then I'll invite you to just chat with your next door neighbor on what are some of the elements that I found here that might be actually, evocative or something I hadn't thought about, or, if there's confusion and so on. Unfortunately, we can't take questions from the whole space. So just, if there are questions of clarification, you might actually, there's so much experience and knowledge and wisdom in this room, so you might as well just try to find it with each other. And as a service announcement, Lucas translated the whole thing. Thank you, Lucas. So here it is in German. I'm not going to read it out loud, but take just a couple of minutes drawing down an iceberg, and then in about 3 minutes or so, 4 minutes, I'll ask you to just check in with your next door neighbor. Should you be interested in knowing more about this whole domain of systems awareness and our compassionate systems framework, we have websites for the center and for our MIT lab as well. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out. And I know that Helle will always be able to also, should you have questions or comments or anything like that, to make sure that I see them. So a few questions?
Yeah, I think so. Christine, you are there.
Ja, wir
Ich muss Deutsch reden, jetzt muss ich das erinnern.
Okay, the mic is on. We asked the two of you whether you feel like asking a question to Mette. Als Professor Dr. Ulrike Beker, Senate Administration for Education, Youth and Family. Yes, thank you for hosting us today. The event connects directly to the principals meeting we had this morning for all principals of Berlin's elementary schools, the way towards the elementary school 2030, and Anne-Laure Brenny also talked about the topic of reflections, because appreciating relationship work with children at school is one of the most important instruments in order to facilitate development among children. And therefore, I'm totally happy that I had the opportunity to attend both events because, as I said, it connects directly to each other. It was also said this morning by Professor Ramsecker about the culture of digitality. And this was also about the question that a third socialization instance is here, and he stressed out the importance of young influences for children, which was another interesting impulse. And next Wednesday, the event will continue with 14 working groups, also on topics regarding elementary school 2030 and appreciating relationship work, recognition and acknowledgement culture is also represented there with several working groups. Also, learning for sustainable development. Schweizerhof Elementary School, who's also here, will talk about the Friday topic, which is a great innovation that is already implemented at many schools and which has been rolled out on a nationwide basis after it was launched by Margret Ransfeld. Ricana Reflections, presented by Anne-Laure Prengel this morning, is also a nationwide or Europe-wide project that is implemented at that level, and there are also several approaches, as it was said, regarding appreciating relationship work, which is now gradually being developed and passed on. What they have in common is, I think, is that relationship work is put in the foreground as one of the most important instruments in order to stimulate children to learn and to develop. And I think this is extremely important, and I appreciate very much what Hella Hansen presented today, the concept she presented today, and which is already intensively in use at school, the Iceberg model. We are familiar with this when it comes to analyzing behavior of children who are seen to be particularly problematic, or as coaching processes, or we know it from coaching processes. And if we look at the events you described here, and if we look at what is in the iceberg that is invisible, then we had the COVID pandemic and Ukraine war. We have strong social impacts on children's experience, on the experience of children, educators, teachers. They all have fears, which is very important and crucial in the current social situation. And then in the invisible part of the iceberg, we also have the early parent-child relationships that have a role to play, relationships children have with their teachers and educators, and all this interacts and combines, and it also interacts with the impact from nature. We saw the melting glaciers. We didn't see it at the iceberg example, we know it, and other natural events which are increasingly in the focus of perception, which also trigger massive fears. And therefore I think that this approach, empathy makes school, is particularly important in the current social situation and even more important than before the COVID pandemic. And I think it is a great approach, and I would appreciate very much if it would be rolled out further in Berlin, not least because it's also a model for health prevention. And as you also said, it's totally important in order to support the well-being of those who are working at schools. Burnout rates and sickness rates can be reduced. Personnel who are not available cause additional stress to those who continue working, and all interacts, and it is very important that this approach is rolled out further. I do not have a concrete question. We just talked about this earlier, and I think this was also okay with you. So I pass on right to Mrs. Weig. Mrs. Wecker, thank you very much. Not a question, but I think you closed the circle to the here, and we keep in touch as far as it concerns Berlin. And thank you very much for being with us today. A question, a genuine question. I also want to. I do not have a question, indeed. So not a question. Basically, it was self-explaining. But I think, how can these mental models be focused more? This is important to me, because we are still in these structures. I'm out now. I worked at the Senate administration, but I can see it in a very relaxed way because I'm retired, but I see it even more clearly that school is still taking place as, say, 100 years ago, I would put it. And what is so lovely with this Empathy Makes School program, and also from you, is the fact that people meet each other in a different way. If I offer professional qualification programs, and if I can talk about topics with colleagues for which I normally do not have any time. Normally I have a working relationship with my colleagues, but then I have the possibility to really exchange, for example, as it was said, mourning death. I don't have that time at school. I don't have the space at school. And if I can appreciate my colleagues in a different way because they said things I didn't know from them before. And this relationship work, and changing this relationship work, and the question is, how can we focus more on these mental models?
For some reason that is completely opaque to me, our cultures, particularly the westernized cultures, have somehow, we seem to have forgotten the world of the inner landscape, and that feeds everything we do outwardly, so that it's completely intertwined. How I feel is actually how I show up, and how I show up will directly impact people around me, and how people around me feel will impact me, because we're social beings before we are anything else. And so the whole essence of that, when we want to get around to working more closely with helping people, recognizing that profound interconnectedness and sense of connection that we have in the social field, requires, I think, a kind of a reset almost, because we don't know how to navigate this space. That's why in all good social emotional learning program we have emotional literacy as part of it, right? And here we have a strong focus on social competencies and so on, but it's not enough that it's something that is just kind of added onto the mix of everything else you need to learn in school. It has to be foundational. How I show up in this world, and how I feel, and how I get triggered by other people, and why I get triggered by them. And by the way, I'm the one who's getting triggered, so it can't really be your problem, can it? Which of course is a nuisance, because it's much nicer when we can blame it on other people. I certainly prefer that, but it doesn't really work that way. It's not the other people's fault. We're the ones who are in this predicament of responding and reacting in a particular way. So we're the ones who can work with that in a meaningful way. And I think that's a lot of the kind of essential work where we are really aligned about what needs to happen. And I will say, in the places where we have been the most successful, this happens literally at the level of the ministry, the level of the counties, or the Bundesländer, danke. Whatever regions are called in this country, because they are named differently in everywhere I work. And so it has to be that kind of joint venture, in a sense, that everybody actually has to do this. Part of what we do, which I think is actually the most important part of our work, is we have a youth leadership team, and they work directly with students. And I don't know if you can imagine, but mostly when our site development team goes out and works with the teachers and the principals, and I work with the leadership and the boards and all of that, and then our youth leaders work directly with the students. So the students don't have to unlearn a whole lot of shit before they can do this. So they will show up after a couple of hours, be like, here's an iceberg, I want this to change because this is clearly how I'm thinking about things, and so on and so forth. And teachers are flabbergasted. Because they're like, how can you understand? I can't even understand what's going on here. And now you've just analyzed this whole situation that we're in. So the resources of empowering young people and the courage it takes for educators to actually allow that to happen, I think that's an essential and pivotal kind of orientation that we need to bring in if we really want to focus on the mental models. So thank you.